LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out 25 of the weekend's best clips for what should be a really good show for you all tonight. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. This week from 4 of the big 5 corporate outlets because CBS's Face the Nation was not broadcast this week, but I still have ABC, NBC, CNN, and Fox News this week from the so-called corporate media here in the United States. And as usual, I'll also have some political comedy clips for you from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher from last Friday night. And also this week, the season premiere of Saturday Night Live that included an appearance by Hillary Clinton herself. As for this week's topics, you can see all the topics I'm covering listed down in the video description. And if you're watching the recorded version of the show, you should see time indexes down there to skip to the topics that most interest you. Also, again, this week, whether you're watching as a live show or a recorded show, I put a link down in the video description to my public Patreon page where you can download the clip list in order of the 25 clips I'm using, and you can see if you can decode the notes that I make to myself. Sometimes you see me using the clip list during the show. That's what I'm looking at. As for the order of the clips, this week I'll start with the 2016 presidential campaign again, though this week it won't overwhelm the show as much, with only 4 clips on the Democratic side and 6 clips on the Republican side. I'll also have 6 clips on the gun issue after the latest mass shooting this week at a community college in Roseburg, Oregon. Next, I'll have several clips on Russia's big move into Syria this week, including Russian airstrikes, and I'll also have several clips on the race to replace John Boehner as Republican Speaker of the House and the big gaffe by the leading candidate for the Speaker of the House, Representative Kevin McCarthy. Finally, I'll have a clip on the discovery of liquid water on Mars and a clip of Richard Dawkins and Bill Maher discussing liberal intolerance and Islamophobia all the way at the end. But first, to begin my coverage of the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign, I want to show Hillary Clinton's appearance on Saturday Night Live last night as the bartender Val, talking to Saturday Night Live cast members Kate McKinnon playing Hillary Clinton, and then just as another bartender, Taryn Killam, over in this clip.
In there, yes.
Hi, Mrs. Clinton. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say my sister's gay, so thank you for all you've done for gay marriage.
Well, you're welcome.
It really is great how long you've supported gay marriage.
Yes. I could have supported it sooner.
Well, you did it pretty soon.
Yeah. Could have been sooner.
Fair point.
Well, let us then tap our fists in friendship. Oh, Val, I'm just so darn bummed. All anyone wants to talk about is Donald Trump.
Donald Trump? Isn't he the one that's like, you're all losers?
That is him.
Do you think he'll win the primaries?
He must. I want to be the one to take him down. I will destroy him, and I will mount his hair in the Oval Office!
So, I don't know, that was Hillary Clinton's attempt to humanize herself and show that she has a sense of humor appearing on Saturday Night Live. And I guess they kind of tweaked her a little on her slow move towards recognizing marriage equality, and a little earlier in the whole clip, and you can see it on YouTube. If you look down in the video description, I put a link down to the Saturday Night Live YouTube page that includes that entire Hillary Clinton segment that I just took a clip from. Earlier in there, they kind of tweak her on being slow on the Keystone Pipeline, being against the Keystone Pipeline. But overall, I think that they did her a favor by letting her appear in that skit. And I don't know, I guess anyone can do a Donald Trump impression. I did one in the last couple weeks, and I guess Hillary Clinton can do one too. She even sang later in the episode, or in that segment. And to show how solicitous they were of Hillary Clinton on the season premiere of Saturday Night Live, I want to show a series of jokes they did about the upcoming Democratic debate, and it's so pro-Hillary that at the end they actually recognize it themselves by saying it's almost like an ad for Hillary Clinton over in this clip.
Joe Biden has said he will not participate in the first Democratic presidential debate, but CNN says they're still holding an empty podium in case he decides to show up last minute. Which makes me wonder, how boring is this debate going to be? I mean, the first podium is empty. Then you got the woman who's already won, the human Lorax, and 3 mannequins from a Joseph A. Bank. Shay, I'll give you $1 million right now if you can name any one of those guys.
Chuck Woolery.
See? And that might have been right. I don't even know. You can't even Google these guys. You Google them, Google's just like, pass. The only way to make this debate interesting is to have Trump moderate it. Or you have Hillary moderate it and just make it a job interview for vice president.
I'm Hillary Clinton, and I approve this
Joke.
So, of course, they even recognized that Hillary Clinton pretty much approved that joke because it didn't really hurt Hillary Clinton. It went against her opponents, including a little dig at Bernie Sanders there. And, of course, if you've been watching my broadcast or the Sunday morning shows over the last several months, you could name all 3 of those other candidates. There was Jim Webb and Lincoln Chafee and Martin O'Malley, who are the 3 other candidates who are going to be in the debate. Lawrence Lessig apparently is not going to be in the debate, which I find a little disappointing. I'd kind of like to see him debate. But the next clip I want to show isn't from NBC's Saturday Night Live. It's from NBC's Meet the Press, where NBC had their latest poll from New Hampshire and Iowa come out. This is the Democratic half of it, which is not really good news for Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's basically stable from where it was before. NBC doesn't have Bernie Sanders beating Hillary Clinton in Iowa, but still has her getting beaten pretty badly by Bernie Sanders in New Hampshire, which I'll discuss after you watch that clip over here.
Let's take a look at the Democrats. Here, things are fairly stable. In Iowa, Clinton ahead, 47-36. It's close, but she's holding that lead. In New Hampshire, again, status quo, but status quo is not good for Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders at 48. In that state, that neighbors Vermont. Hillary Clinton sitting at 39. By the way, when you throw Joe Biden in here, guess who lead expands? Bernie Sanders. Coming up, we're going to break.
LiberalViewer present.
Sorry, hit the wrong clip there. I guess it's not a show till I hit the wrong clip at least once. I almost restarted the show there. But you can see the Democratic side, there's not a lot of movement in the NBC poll from New Hampshire and Iowa. And then the last clip I want to show about the Democratic side is from CNN's State of the Union. Jake Tapper, unfortunately no Bernie Sanders clips, but instead I have a couple Elizabeth Warren clips. Senator Elizabeth Warren was on CNN's State of the Union. I'm going to show a clip from her talking about the Republicans in a minute, but first here's her talking about Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton and who it is that she wants to endorse, and she doesn't say, of course, but sort of she gives a little bit of an indication in this answer that it's about 2.5 minutes long. It starts with Jake Tapper pointing out that Bernie Sanders has raised almost as much almost as much money as Hillary Clinton in the latest money disclosures that came out. Bernie Sanders has raised $26 million, mostly from small donations, unlike Hillary Clinton's money. And I'll discuss that after you watch this clip of Jake Tapper and Elizabeth Warren from this morning here.
Bernie Sanders showed his anti-big money campaign is bringing in big money. He raised $26 million in the third quarter, just $2 million less than Hillary Clinton, but most of it from small donors. Strong financial numbers can, of course, lead to big endorsements. The one many Democrats are waiting for these days is Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, the financial reform advocate who has become the leading voice, perhaps, of the progressive left. But she's not given the nod to anyone yet. We tried to see where her loyalties lie at the Atlantic's Washington Ideas Forum.
You were one of many female Democratic senators to sign a letter a few years ago urging Secretary Clinton to run. Should that be seen as an endorsement in itself?
No, she's running.
along with other people, and they're getting their ideas out there, and I think that's what should happen during this part of the season.
So you just wanted her to run?
Well, I want everyone who wants to run for president to get out there, put their ideas out there, talk about their ideas with the American people. That's how it should be. That's how democracy is supposed to work.
I think that you and Bernie Sanders align fairly closely on all the major issues. When you decide who to endorse, is it just going to be about who you agree with the most, or will you be taking other things into consideration, such as who has a better chance of being the nominee or winning in November?
Look, at this moment, I don't know because I'm not there. What I do know is that people are out talking about these key ideas, and I think that's exactly the right thing to do. I think we should be talking about Glass-Steagall. I think we should be talking about the role that the major financial institutions play, not just in this economy, but play in the political sphere.
Do you disagree with the idea that you and Bernie Sanders seem to be more closely aligned on issues than you are with other Democrats running for president?
Do you want to ask this 6 different ways?
That's kind of my job.
Yeah, well, and kind of my job is to get out there and to keep pushing these issues. You know, I will say this. Bernie gets out and he fights for what he believes in. He fights from the heart on these issues. And I think he's done an enormous service by pushing them forward into the agenda. I think that Secretary Clinton has also been pushing forward issues into the agenda that are really important.
So that's a fairly even-handed analysis from Senator Elizabeth Warren. I guess she's waiting to see how things shake out before she endorses anyone. And she didn't really answer the question, but I guess she gave a little bit of an indication. And I'm sorry there were no Bernie Sanders clips this week, but Senator Bernie Sanders was not on any of the shows. Hillary Clinton wasn't on any of the... It was basically none of the Democratic candidates were on the Sunday morning news programs. I am going to move on now to the Republican side. So there were a couple of the candidates, including Donald Trump, who were over on the Sunday morning shows doing interviews this morning. And I'll have a few of those clips. But I want to start off with a little bit of analysis. First from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher from his New Rules segment at the end, where he talked about this sort of schizophrenic split in the Republican Party between the economic conservatives, the ones who love Ayn Rand and, you know, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the religious evangelical conservatives who supposedly believe in what Jesus said in the Christian Bible. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after you see Bill Maher talk about that schizophrenic split in the Republican Party and how to overcome it in this clip.
During a papal visit, exposed just how little these so-called Christians of the far right believe in what Jesus actually said. How could they? There is not a tent in the world big enough to fit under it both Jesus and Ayn Rand. In order to be both Republican and Christian, they had to create an entirely new Jesus. We don't only have two Americas, we have two Jesuses now. It's true. Liberals have the traditional Jesus who hated rich assholes and wouldn't shut up about how they should give away all their money. And conservatives made up a completely new Jesus, a small businessman from Galilee. Whose main gripe is big government and who wants to make Nazareth great again. I call him supply-side Jesus. He'd love to help the less fortunate, but he's got investors to think about. Like the time supply-side Jesus performed a miracle and created a bounty of loaves and fishes, and then gave them all to the top 1% so they could trickle down to the takers. Or the time supply-side Jesus came upon a leper who asked to be healed. So supply-side Jesus bought the company that makes leprosy medication and jacked up the price. Jesus may have said it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. But it was supply-side Jesus who said, Did I ever tell you about the time I shot a camel? In conclusion, I would just like to say that Donald Trump is actually the perfect candidate for today's Republicans because he says, he does, that his two favorite books are the Bible and The Art of the Deal. Trump says one is about a perfect God who teaches humanity the right way to live, and the other is the Bible. All right.
That's kind of a funny little punchline from Bill Maher there, and I didn't shrink that down. I hope I don't get a copyright claim from HBO. I probably will, because I didn't shrink that down and put it in a frame, unfortunately, which I try to do. I don't know why I messed that up, but I want to show another clip from Elizabeth Warren now, sort of on the same topic. Jake Tapper pointed out to her that even some Republicans are getting a little overwhelmed by the greed of the Republican Party, that a couple Republicans, Donald Trump, before he put out his tax plan, and even Jeb Bush, have sort of come out against the low taxes paid by the hedge fund people. And Elizabeth Warren gave a little bit of her own political comedy in response to Jake Tapper's question about that on CNN State of the Union this morning here.
What do you make of the fact that two of the leading Republican presidential candidates, Donald Trump and Jeb Bush, are now both endorsing closing the loophole when it comes to hedge fund managers, the carried interest loophole?
It means that even when your ears are stuffed with money, you get a little sound that comes through. And that's what's happening here. It's like, hello, billionaires should not be paying taxes at a lower rate than teachers and firefighters. And that has even seeped through to a few of the rich guys on the other side. Stunner.
I like that line, ears stuffed with money. Even those people whose ears are stuffed with money, that's something you hopefully will hear more later in the campaign from some of the other candidates. Anyway, having shown those two introductory clips kind of analyzing and critiquing the Republican Party, now I want to go back to NBC's Meet the Press, where Chuck Todd gave the Republican side of the latest NBC Marist poll. Is that NBC Wall Street Journal? I can't remember who the other person in the poll is. I think he says it at the beginning of this. And then you can, after you see who's up and who's down in New Hampshire and Iowa this week, I'll talk about a little more. Anyway, here's the clip.
In this week's Nerd Screen, all about our new NBC News Wall Street Journal Marist polls out of Iowa and New Hampshire. We're going to start with the Republican race in Iowa here. The leader is the same, Donald Trump, but his lead is down 5 points from the last time we tested a month ago. Ben Carson in second. He's down 3. The movers here in Iowa, Carly Fiorina, she jumped 3 points into third place. Jeb Bush in the high single digits there. Let's look at the rest of the second tier. Cruz, Rubio, Jindal, Huckabee, Paul, and Christie. Look at that, all bunched up between 4 and 6. Would say here that maybe it's Bobby Jindal that has to feel the best about this. Above 5% somewhere, being Iowa. That's good news for him. If your candidate isn't on here, by the way, it means they didn't top 3% in this field. Now let's look at the New Hampshire primary here. Donald Trump still in the lead, but look at this. His number has dropped a whopping 7 points. Carly Fiorina, first time she's in second place in any of the early states. She jumped up double digits here, 10 points. She's now up to 16%. Jeb Bush, Rubio, Carson also in double digits. Jeb Bush, by the way, may be benefiting from a new multi-million-dollar ad campaign he's got in New Hampshire. Let's look at the second tier here in New Hampshire. Christie, Kasich, Cruz, and Paul, all between 5 and 7. The news here, look at this. John Kasich, remember when he was in double digits in September? That has been cut in half. Now, let's take a
So I'd say one of the most significant things about that poll that I wanted to point out was at the very end that John Kasich has kind of dropped down in New Hampshire. You know, for several shows I've talked about how John Kasich might have some New Hampshire blossoming where he becomes the establishment candidate who, where the establishment would rally around him, and you know, as opposed to the outsiders like Donald Trump and Ben Carson and Carly Fiorina. He's not doing so well in New Hampshire anymore, so that whole strategy and that, you know, hypothetical pathway seems to be gone. it looks like Jeb Bush is doing a little better after spending a bunch of money in New Hampshire, so maybe he will end up being the establishment alternative. That was what was supposed to happen at the beginning. Scott Walker was going to be the establishment alternative. He's already dropped out. One of the other establishment alternatives is Marco Rubio's doing really well, and he looks like he may have the best chance. But someone who has sort of an outside chance still is New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, and I want to show one clip from him over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where George Stephanopoulos showed this interesting graph about how Republican voters over the last several months have decided that they want new ideas and not experience and a proven record. And so George Stephanopoulos asks Chris Christie, how is he going to deal with that since he has a record and he's running on his record? And he, of course, says he's not running on his record. He's running on his plans for the future in this clip.
Showing a little progress in the campaign. You had a good performance at the last debate. New polls out this morning show you picking up a couple of points in both Iowa and New Hampshire. But I want to show you this from the Pew poll. It came out just this week, and it shows an interesting trend line, asking Republican voters what they want. Back in March, it was kind of split evenly, those who wanted someone with experience and a proven record, someone with new ideas and a different approach. Look what's happened since the campaign began, skyrocketing for new ideas and a different approach. What does that tell you, and can you meet that test given the fact that you've sort of been running on your experience and record?
No, I haven't been running on my experience and record, George. In fact, I'm the most detailed person with future plans in this campaign of anyone. You know this. We've given 5 major policy speeches that laid out specifically what we do. Because you know what? The people out there in the audience today, they don't care about what I've done. They care about what I'm going to do for them going forward as President of the United States. It's like I said at the debate. They don't want an argument between Carly and Donald about who's declared bankruptcy more, who's lost money more, who's gains more money. They're all successful. That's great. Congratulations. But for the 45-year-old unemployed construction worker out there, you know what he wants to know? How are we going to improve this economy? How are we going to keep his family safe from terrorism? And those are all about those things. Campaigns are about tomorrow, not about yesterday. My campaign is about tomorrow and a greater America tomorrow. That's why we've laid out the plans we have.
You heard Donald Trump.
I'm not really that convinced that Chris Christie is going to be that establishment alternative. He's creeping up a little in the polls, but somehow I don't think he's really going to strike a chord with enough Republican voters to do that well. But I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. The last candidate interview clip I want to show in this section on the Republican race is a Donald Trump clip. He was on a couple shows, and I actually am going to show a couple more Donald Trump clips later on the topics of guns and on Russia and Syria. But this is Donald Trump talking about the primary election itself, and Chuck Todd is following up on something Donald Trump said earlier about conditions where he might actually drop out if he were not doing well. He's saying he's not a masochist. This was asked both on NBC's Meet the Press and ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I happened to take the clip of Chuck Todd asking the question, and you can see that here.
The day that caught me off guard, you said you're not a masochist, and if you start falling in the polls, you'll go back to your business. What does that mean? Are you not in this for the long haul or not? And I was just going to say, I heard it. You said it on the Today Show and with my buddy John Harwood, and it caught my ear. I'm like, uh-oh.
No, you know
what does that mean?
A lot of people have asked me that question. Number one, I'm not a masochist. And if I was dropping in the polls where I saw that I wasn't going to win, why would I continue? And it's funny, maybe it's like not like me because it's the power of positive thinking. I'm a very positive person. I'm a positive thinker. But the truth is, I'm a realist. I'm doing great in the polls right now. I think you will say. I'm not saying anything. I'm leading everything.
You're leading every poll.
Everything. By a lot.
In a Republican primary.
Not only leading, by a lot. Okay.
General elections are different stories, but that's all right.
Well,
we're not there yet.
You know, I believe in polls. You know, how many elections do you see where the polls were wrong? Not that many. Okay. You see them, but not that many. If I were doing poorly, if I saw myself going down, if you would stop calling me because you no longer have any interest in Trump because he has no chance, I'd go back to my business. I have no problem with that.
So, I don't know, is that wishful thinking? Is that actually going to happen? Will Trump eventually lose the support of enough of the Republican voters that he'll decide it's masochistic to stay in? Well, I think his weak spot was actually pointed out pretty well on Saturday Night Live in their, what they call their cold open. And you can see the whole cold open on the Saturday Night Live YouTube channel at a link I have down in the video description. This is a little clip from the end of that cold open that I wanted to show you. It's Donald Trump with, and this is played by Taran Killam, who's going to play Donald Trump on Saturday Night Live this season. And then it's Cicely Strong playing his wife, Melania, I think her name is, Melania Trump. And I think she kind of points out what his real weak point is for the Republican electorate, or the Republican primary electorate, which I will discuss after you watch that clip over here.
Yes, please put Donald in the White House. You know, he is total package. He's strong.
No, I didn't ask her to say that.
He is wise.
This is all off the cuff.
He is good in bed.
Those are her words.
You know, he's the only man who can unite both sides. Because he's running as Republican, but his ideas are actually more like Democrat.
Well, that's not really.
Yeah, actually, he was Democrat before he was Republican.
I think we're getting a little off topic.
And social issues, you know, you can be gay, you can have abortion. He don't care.
Look, here's the bottom line. I'm just like you, a regular Joe, but better. A man of the people.
Yes, like everyone else, you know, he puts his hair on one strand at a time.
That's right. Yeah, and like everybody, live from...
Another Donald Trump hair joke, just like in the Hillary Clinton bartender skit, but I guess that's the low-hanging fruit for if you're going to do jokes about Donald Trump. And I thought that was actually kind of funny, especially, like I said, it pointed out the weakness that Donald Trump has, in that a lot of the positions that he's adopted to do well in the Republican field are not long-standing positions for him, and I think he could pivot out of them at any time. And I mean, the only thing that, I mean, he does have sort of a nationalist, populist theme that goes back many years about like China and Japan and now Russia. But on some things like foreign policy, he isn't really that hawkish. I'm going to show a clip when he talks about Syria when I get to that topic, where he's to the left of most of the Republicans. And I think that he may start losing support when a lot of people in the Republican Party see that he's not a real conservative. Some of the other candidates have tried to attack him on that basis and haven't done that well yet, but it's still early. There's still time. I guess we'll see. And maybe eventually he will drop in the polls and decide to go back to his business. We can only hope. There will be some more political clips, some more Donald Trump clips, and because the next few issues, even though they're not the presidential race, politics kind of has bled into them. It's the gun issue, and then the issue of Russia and Syria, and then the issue of the Speaker of the House, the people who are trying to be the new Speaker of the House after John Boehner resigned. I'm going to start with the gun issue. There was a shooting again this week. There have been so many mass shootings. They seem to be coming more and more often. This one was in Roseburg, Oregon, at a community college. First, I'm going to show an NBC clip. Let me make sure I get this reporter's name correct. It's Miguel Almaguer from Roseburg, Oregon, talking about some of the latest developments, including a clip from the father of the alleged shooter over here.
Yeah, absolutely, Chuck. We know that the gunman's father, 26-year-old Chris Harper Mercer, unloaded several rounds inside the campus behind me. Police say he was heavily armed, that we now know he told students inside that classroom to get together, to lie in the center of that classroom, and then began shooting them. He told one lucky survivor, he said, apparently according to his victims, that they would pass on a manifesto to police that would lead them to more information about the shooting. As you mentioned, the victim's father is also speaking out for the first time about gun violence and his son. Here's what he said.
How on earth could he compile 13 guns? How can that happen? You know, they talk about gun laws, they talk about gun control. Every time something like this happens, they talk about it and nothing is done. I'm not trying to say that that's to blame for what happened, but if Chris had not been able to get a hold of 13 guns, it wouldn't have happened.
Chuck, this is clearly sparking a national debate, but interestingly enough, just shortly after that interview with CNN, we also spoke to a victim survivor here at the hospital, and she said she believes that more people should be carrying guns inside campuses like this one. So it's certainly an interesting debate, even after all of the bloodshed and the massacre here. It's still igniting the country, Chuck.
So even in that report, you can see sort of the Republican side and the Democratic side, how it's a partisan debate between more gun control, more restrictions on guns, versus whether we should actually have more guns to stop, so that a good guy with a gun can stop the bad guy with the gun. And I even heard some people during this week say that this shooter was stopped by a good guy with the gun because a police officer killed him, although it turned out he committed suicide, so that wasn't even true. President Obama came out and said he wanted to politicize this explicitly, and I'm going to show a little more on that, but first I want to show this clip of from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where they put together many times that President Obama had come out and spoken to the nation after these mass shootings, and they all sort of like blend together. And at the end, George Stephanopoulos says it's 15. He must mean that President Obama has spoken 15 times about mass shootings, although there have been a lot more than 15 mass shootings, as I'll talk about after you watch this montage of President Obama talking about mass shootings here.
There's been another mass shooting in America. We may never understand what leads anybody to terrorize their fellow human beings like this. Such violence, such evil is senseless. We've endured too many of these tragedies in the past few years. And each time I learn the news, I react not as a president, but as anybody else would, as a parent. I've had to make statements like this too many times. Communities like this have had to endure tragedies like this too many times. I hope and pray that I don't have to come out again during my tenure as president to offer my condolences to families in these circumstances.
It's President Obama speaking out for the 15th time, 15 mass shootings on his watch. Let's talk about it now on our...
Of course, that may be the 15th time President Obama has come out, but there have been a lot more than 15 mass shootings on President Obama's watch, and I want to show Chuck Todd reporting several statistics about guns, how there have been, I think, 294. Is that, let me look at, is that what I have here? Yeah, 294 mass shootings just this year, based on where there have been 4 people hit in the shooting, including the shooter possibly. That's like the definition that's used in this particular website that collates the mass shooting data. And then Chuck Todd will also show how there have been a lot more than in the United States than in other nations, and then we'll show both Obama's reaction and some Republican reaction over in this clip.
According to mass shooter tracker data, which defines a mass shooting as an incident where 4 or more people are shot, there now have been 294 mass shootings this year alone, nearly 1,000 since the database was created in the wake of the Sandy Hook shooting in December of 2012. That's more than 1 a day. The U.S. has a gun homicide rate nearly 4 times higher than Switzerland's, 6 times Canada's, 16 times Germany's, 21 times Australia's, and 49 times the rate in France. But the high-profile shootings haven't shifted views on gun control. Though 87% of Americans favor expanded background checks last year for the first time in more than 2 decades, it's a higher percentage of Americans, 52%, who said it was more important to protect the right of Americans to own guns than to control gun ownership. And we saw the divide play out this week, beginning with a visibly frustrated president who admitted he was politicizing the issue.
Somehow this has become routine. What's also routine is that somebody somewhere will comment and say, Obama politicized this issue. Well, this is something we should politicize.
On the campaign trail, Republican candidates responded and sounded strikingly similar.
I always find it interesting that the reflexive reaction of the left is to say we need more gun laws. Criminals don't follow gun laws. Only law-abiding people follow gun laws.
Gun control only works for normal law-abiding citizens. It doesn't work for crazies.
You take guns away from people who are law-abiding, the people who are going to cause these horrible things are still going to have them.
Before we start calling for more laws, I think we ought to consider why we don't enforce the laws we have.
It's very sad to see, but I resist the notion, and I had this challenge as governor, because look, stuff happens. There's always a crisis, and the impulse is always to do something, and it's not necessarily the right thing to do.
So that was the last clips there. Always really annoy me when the Republicans try to make these specious arguments about guns, and I'm going to show a really specious clip at the end from Donald Trump where he even skips over the fact he kind of blames it all on mental illness, which was one of the refrains I heard from a lot of Republicans. And in the clip that I'm going to show where he's talking to George Stephanopoulos in a few minutes, you'll see that George Stephanopoulos even brings up that stat you saw from Chuck Todd in that last clip about how the United States has way more gun deaths and gun homicides than any other country, even and per capita, even though, are we crazier? Do we have more mental illness? I mean, I'm sure some of my viewers, especially from overseas, might say yes, but the truth is Americans aren't any crazier than anybody else. The fact is it's the easy access to guns, the glorification of gun violence, and I'm not exactly sure, but I want to show a couple more statistics and then a couple refutations of what Donald Trump's going to say at the end of this topic. First, here's a chart. One of the things that President Obama said in that news conference that wasn't shown in that last clip, he challenged the news media to compare the deaths from guns in the United States to the deaths from terrorism. CNN put up a couple charts on Facebook that I copied. I put a link down to the CNN article comparing gun deaths to terrorism. First, they put up the last 10 years here, from 2004 through 2013, and you'll see there it's 313 deaths, and this is Americans killed overseas as well. Total American deaths by terrorism, and then American deaths by firearms just on U.S. soil, and you'll see it's 1,000 times, more than 1,000 times greater. And just in case you think, oh, that's not fair because it only goes back 10 years, it doesn't include 9/11. If you include 9/11, then you'll get that big bump of 3,000 extra deaths. Well, CNN actually had a chart includes 9/11. You'll see even if you include 9/11, you get 3,380 deaths. It's still more than 100 times. So if you compare the gun deaths to the terrorism deaths, the fact that we are so scared of terrorism and put so much money into fighting terrorism and we restrict so many liberties because of the threat of terrorism, it's ridiculous compared to the people who die from gun violence. As I think I pointed out a few weeks ago, some of those deaths from guns in the United States, even I think a plurality, are from suicides. So those get included in the statistics. But even without the suicide deaths, it's still, the comparison is ridiculous. And then one other argument I want to refute is about the gun-free zones. And this is from CNN State of the Union. Jake Tapper had on Mark Kelly, whose wife, Gabby Giffords, was a victim of gun violence in Tucson. She was a member of Congress and was going to meet her constituents and was shot by another one of these crazy young white males who had too many guns. And anyway, here's Mark Kelly over on CNN State of the Union refuting the idea that gun-free zones are unsafe because people don't have guns there to protect themselves in this clip.
Gun-free zones, because Oregon is a state where people can carry concealed weapons on them, but the school itself, Umpqua Community College, was a gun-free zone. What is the purpose of putting up a sign that says gun-free zones? It seems to a lot of people that might attract bad guys.
Well, there have been studies that have shown, first of all, mass shootings, there's been about, less than 15% of them have happened in a gun-free zone. And there's no indication from another study that any shooter intentionally went to a gun-free zone. You often see that as some folks will say that that's why somebody went to a gun-free zone. Well, there's no evidence of that. And I think the idea is where there are more guns, people are less safe. I mean, if you have a gun in any kind of situation where things start to get heated, I mean, there's a higher likelihood that somebody's going to get shot. And I think when we see in states where the gun laws are the strongest, there are less deaths from gun violence. I mean, that is certainly clear.
All right, Mark Kelly, thank you so much, and please send our best.
So that's Mark Kelly making a good argument, citing statistics about gun-free zones. And before I get to the Donald Trump clip that is totally specious, I want to show one more refutation of what he starts off talking about, which is the Second Amendment. This is from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. He had on a New Yorker a writer for the New Yorker magazine. Let me make sure. Adam Gopnik, who actually said a lot of true things. I'm a lawyer and I followed what's happened on the Second Amendment, and he points out that the Second Amendment wasn't even recognized as an individual right till about 7 years ago by the Supreme Court. There was sort of this concerted effort by some right-wing libertarians to create the atmosphere where that could happen that he doesn't really talk about. But I'll talk about that a little more after you watch that clip from Real Time with Bill Maher, where they talk, where Bill Maher starts off claiming the Second Amendment is this like fatal flaw, the root of the problem here.
The liberals are talking about in this country doing what they did in Australia. That's the difference, is that they're still not getting at the root of the problem, the Second Amendment.
Well, but the Second Amendment, I don't think is a root problem. You have to remember, Bill. Yes, you have to remember, Bill, that the interpretation, the radical misreading of the Second Amendment that we live under now, which says the Second Amendment guarantees rights to individuals to own guns, is extremely recent. It only took up 7 years ago in Scalia's Heller decision. Before that, for almost 200 years, the consensus of constitutional scholars on all sides and of the Supreme Court was that the Second Amendment, which after all begins talking about a well-regulated militia, referenced a well-regulated militia, that it only protected the rights of the states to form militias. Now, you may disagree with that, but that was the consensus view until 7 short years ago. And all we need to do is to have the sanity.
And before that,
no
one was dying of gun violence.
No one was dying with the same regularity of gun massacres as they are today.
Well, I don't know if you can blame the Heller decision in the Supreme Court for the uptick in mass shootings. In fact, I think they go back more than 7 years, the increase frequency. But what Adam Gopnik of the New Yorker magazine said there is mostly accurate. I mean, when he says it was a consensus opinion, there was always this undertone of an individual right, but it was definitely a consensus of the circuits that until I think it was the Fifth Circuit broke ranks more than 7 years ago on whether it was the Second Amendment guaranteed an individual right to bear arms or it was a collective right based on the militia. And it has to do with like the first 13 words of the Second Amendment, which make it sound like a collective right, which is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. And then the second half is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So which half, do you put your emphasis on? That's what is sort of the split in the Second Amendment. And it was a 5-4 decision in the Supreme Court. Theoretically, it could get changed, but even the people who say it's an individual right on the Supreme Court say that there can be regulations. They can put health, safety, and size and manner. The exact scope of that hasn't really been worked out because it was only 7 years ago the Supreme Court found this individual right. But there's no right to own nuclear weapons and bazookas, probably, and you just can't ban handguns is basically what the Supreme Court said. But how that's going to go, I don't know. But I wanted to show that as the last refutation of Donald Trump, who starts off saying that, he's for the Second Amendment, unlike President Obama. And then he talks about how it's, the same problems existed thousands of years ago and will exist 1 million years from now or millions of years from now. and he doesn't really address the fact that when he talks about mental illness, that Americans aren't more crazy than all those other countries with less gun deaths. But anyway, here's that clip.
And, you know, you have a big issue between the Second Amendment folks and the non-Second Amendment folks, and he is a non-Second Amendment person.
You think he was being a divider?
I think he was. I think he was actually being a divider because, you know, George, no matter how you cut it, you have people that are mentally ill and they have problems and they're going to slip through the cracks, and no matter how you do it, no matter how you try it, and if you go back 2,000 years and if you go forward 2 million years, you're going to have problems, and it may not even be politically correct to say.
Every country has mentally ill people. Not every country has mass shootings as frequently as we do.
But what's interesting is the places, you look at Chicago, it's got the toughest gun laws in the United States. You look at other places where they have gun laws that are very tough. They do, generally speaking, worse than anybody else. I mean, if you look at some of these places, Chicago's a good example, but go to Baltimore, go to various cities where they have very, very tough gun laws. They do terribly.
So what would you do about it? You sound pretty passive.
No, I'm not passive at all. I can tell you that people say, oh, we're going to stop it. It doesn't work that way. This has taken place, whether it's this type of crime or other crimes, taken place forever, from the beginning. And it's going, you go out 1 million years from now, you're going to have problems. And even if you have a very tough system, you're going to have people that slip through the cracks. And it's a very sad situation, and you have to, great vigilance. I mean, you have to show great vigilance and watch and be careful and security and everything else. But no matter what you do, you will have problems, and that's the way the world goes.
That's your answer? We're going to have problems?
Yes, you're going to, it's in it. Now, George, I could say, oh, we're going to do this and that, and it's never going to happen again. You have sick people in this country and throughout the world, and you're always going to have difficulty. That's why you have newscasts.
I guess you're always going to have some problems. I mean, who can disagree with that? But whether we're going to have problems with gun violence millions of years from now, we certainly didn't have problems with gun violence thousands of years ago. I think he's talking about we had problems with crazy people, and I don't know whether we'll still have problems with crazy people millions of years from now. I don't know if there will still be people millions of years from now. I don't know if, especially if we can't solve problems like these mass shootings. That doesn't bode well for the human species. But anyway, that's the last clip I want to play on the whole gun issue, which seems to come up way too often and came up again this week. Now I want to move on to the next topic. So this week, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, came and spoke at the United Nations. President Obama spoke at the United Nations. A lot of world leaders did. Also the president of Iran. And Putin and Obama sort of traded insults on who was responsible for the problems in the Middle East. And right after a meeting between Putin and Obama, the Russian ambassador to Iraq apparently went to the American embassy in Iraq and gave 1 hour notice that Russia was going to start doing these airstrikes in Syria. And this caused a lot of consternation in the United States. And I actually uploaded a clip. I forgot to put a link down in the video description, but it's the last video I uploaded on Friday where President Obama in his news conference spent over 7 minutes explaining why Putin is not outsmarting him, and this whole Syria move shows how Putin is actually playing from weakness, that Bashar al-Assad, who is ally of Russia, the putative dictator in Syria who has lost a lot of territory to the Islamic State and to some other rebels. Anyway, that Russia had to go in to prop him up, which doesn't show strength, it shows weakness. And anyway, before I get to all that, I want to show Donald Trump actually, like I said earlier in the show, taking a kind of hands-off attitude, coming out to the left of most of the Republican candidates, and actually saying that he thinks that dictators are better than chaos, looking at some of the things that have happened in the Middle East, which I will discuss after you watch that clip over here.
I see we've seen Russia go heavy into Syria this week, at least 2 days of airstrikes. Yesterday, Hillary Clinton, today, John Kasich, both say we should establish a no-fly zone in Syria. Would you do that?
I don't think so. I think what I want to do is I want to sit back, and this does not sound like me very much, but I want to sit back and I want to see what happens. You know, Russia got bogged down when it was the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. They thought that would be quick and easy, and they'll go in, they'll clean it up.
You think he's falling into a trap?
Well, I think it's not going to be great for them, if you want to know the truth. But let's just look. They got bogged down. It destroyed the Soviet Union. I mean, they essentially went bankrupt. It destroyed the Soviet Union, Afghanistan. Now they're going into Syria. There are so many traps. There's so many problems. When I heard they were going in to fight ISIS, I said, great.
But they're not bombing ISIS.
Well, not yet. But they don't want ISIS going into Russia either. So they're not bombing them yet. And the other thing I look at is Assad. Assad's a bad guy, but they're all bad guys. We're supporting rebels. You know, they talk about the Syria Free Rebels. We're supporting rebels. We don't even know who they are.
Better the devil you know?
Well, I spoke to a general who's very, much on. He said, Mr. Trump, we have no idea who these people are. They may be worse than Assad. So we're going to spend all of this effort, probably have to go against Iran now. I mean, and Iran, we're making Iran rich and powerful. You notice Iran now is coming in with the ground troops. They have $150 billion. All of a sudden, they're rich. The sanctions are gone. Everything's gone. What we've done with Iran is one of the most incompetent things I've ever seen. So now we have this, and we're going to fight for people that we don't even know who they are. Now, if you look at Libya, you look at Gaddafi, you look at what's gone there, you look at Iraq with Saddam Hussein, I mean, do you think we're better off now? Because I personally don't.
We still do have this huge...
Now, it's kind of interesting to see Donald Trump to the left of most of the Republican field, who mostly want to do this no-fly zone. Even Hillary Clinton came out for a no-fly zone, so in a way he's to the left of Hillary Clinton on this issue, and he wants to passively watch Vladimir Putin walk into this trap. He sounded a little bit like Barack Obama, who said that it was going to be a trap for Putin, which you can see that, like I said, in that clip I uploaded on Friday, and also like Bill Maher over on HBO's Real Time, over in his monologue, he said kind of a similar thing about Putin walking into a trap over in this clip.
But speaking of that, someone has started a pointless military operation in the Middle East, and for once it wasn't us. That's right. Russia is bombing. Vladimir Putin would like to take Syria off of our hands, and I have one word for him: sold. Sold. Let's get him to sign the papers before he sobers up. I mean, that's like selling a diesel Volkswagen with blood on the tires. I am for it.
Diesel Volkswagen with blood on the tires. I like that punchline. But I want to show a little bit more military analysis of what's going on in Syria rather than that sort of political analysis. This is from Fox News Sunday. They had on their military analyst, retired General Jack Keane, and he put up a map that kind of showed where the different areas of control are in Syria and where the airstrikes are taking place, that differentiates between the Islamic State forces and then the other Syrian rebels, and kind of shows how Assad was really threatened, and that's why Russia had to come in and prop him up. And I'll talk about that a little more after you watch this fairly accurate portrayal of what's happening, even though it's on Fox News over here.
This is a blow-up of the Syria map. It doesn't represent all of Syria for the purposes of the airstrikes. The orange represents the regime control area, and the yellow and the green represents the rebels. The green is actually ISIS. What's happening in Syria in the last year, the rebels have made some significant gains in Palmyra and an airfield near here, and up here in the north. This is Idlib province, and this encroaches on the Alawite coastal enclave that's right here, and this is where the Russian base is, the naval base. That's correct. And this is his political support. So the regime is in a precarious situation. The reason for the airstrikes are to stop this advance by the rebels, particularly in this area here and here. And these starbursts indicate the airstrikes have been taking place over the last 3 or 4 days. There's been a couple out here to the east near ISIS's headquarters at Raqqa, but that's window dressing, because this is the focus right here. And what we're going to see, the second purpose of the airstrikes is not just to stop the advance, but to set the conditions for a ground counteroffensive to push back the rebels out of this area?
Well, let me get to that, because the U.S. officials are reporting that 300 to 600 Iranian forces are being deployed into to Syria, and that's in addition to the 1,500 that are already there. Your sense of where they're going to be deployed and what this Russian-Iranian alliance in Syria is going to mean?
Well, first of all, the Russian-Iranian alliance strategically is a game changer for the Middle East. It's going to impact every country in the Middle East and likely diminish U.S. influence. In terms of what's taking place in Syria, this regime would have fallen 3 years ago without Russia and Iran. Iranians are bringing in about 3,000 more to add to what they already have here, which is 7,000 on the ground. They will provide advisors to the regime military. They will organize the local militias, which are 100,000 strong, with leaders and advisors. This ground offensive could not succeed without Iran's influence and without Russia air power.
So that's basically the alliance between Russia, Iran, and Assad that is trying to keep Assad alive in Syria. There's a Russian base there they were talking about in northwest Syria, and that is a fairly accurate look at where the different players are on the ground in Syria. So that's why I wanted to show that clip. And then before I leave the subject of Russia, I want to show one of President Obama's longest and fiercest foreign policy critics. Senator John McCain was over on CNN's State of the Union talking to Jake Tapper, and Jake Tapper showed a very short clip from the 7.5-minute clip I uploaded on Friday, where President Obama said that this is not going to turn into a proxy war between the United States and Russia, which John McCain disagreed with and found many different ways to blame President Obama for basically everything that's going wrong over in this clip.
All right, let's move on to Syria. President Obama saying on Friday that his administration is not going to make Syria into a proxy war with Russia. Take a listen.
We're not going to make Syria into a proxy war between the United States and Russia. That would be bad strategy on our part. This is not some, superpower chessboard contest.
My question to you, Senator, is this conflict in Syria already a proxy war with Russia?
Of course it is, and when the president says we're not going to have that strategy, we don't have a strategy. Excuse me, we don't have a strategy. Jake, you had to recall the events that took place over the weekend when John Kerry, when we were watching this military buildup, including anti-aircraft missile batteries and fighter aircraft. ISIS doesn't have fighter aircraft, and so that was kind of interesting. But more importantly, John Kerry called Lavrov 3 times to find out what was going on. The president met for 90 minutes with Vladimir Putin. Then 48 hours later, a Russian general shows up at our embassy in Baghdad to give us an hour warning that strikes are commencing. That is treating the United States with disdain and contempt. And of course they are hitting the Free Syrian Army enclaves and places which have had some success. This is the CIA-run operations, and they want to take them out. What Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad want to do is provide us with the choice between ISIS and Bashar al-Assad. And in order to do that, you take out the Free Syrian Army, which in the case of the DOD-trained one group is now down to 4 or 5, approximately $9 million each.
So that's the big critique of Obama's foreign policy in Syria and the Middle East from, like I said, one of his longest and fiercest critics, the man who ran against him back in 2008, Senator John McCain, the man responsible for almost putting Sarah Palin a heartbeat away from the presidency. You always have to remember that when you think about how reasonable Senator John McCain is, I guess. But I wanted to show those clips on what's happening in Syria between Russia and the United States, because since there's military operations from both Russia and the United States going on in Syria, I guess there's always the chance of World War III starting from that. That's worth talking about, I guess. That's a story worth covering, right? And this was covered on the Sunday morning news programs, all of them covered it, although with they had different top stories. And so the next topic I want to get to was the top story on Fox News Sunday, believe it or not. It was covered on all of the networks, but mostly it was covered over on the pundit panels. But over on Fox News Sunday, they covered the race for Speaker of the House as the top story in their introduction, especially because there was a big gaffe from the leading candidate, California Republican Kevin McCarthy. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show you. This is the introduction to Fox News Sunday, where they start talking about the race for Speaker of the House. Then they talk about how President Obama is failing in Syria. And then they finally talk about the shooting a little bit, which I was a little surprised that it was one of the top stories. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after you watch that clip here.
A big potential shakeup in the race for Speaker of the House. Congressman Jason Chaffetz says he's seriously considering a run to lead the Republican majority. Today, he'll announce his decision on Fox News Sunday.
Everybody thought Hillary Clinton was unbeatable, right? But we put together a Benghazi special committee. Her numbers are dropping. I did not intend to imply in any way that that work is political.
Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy was the frontrunner for the job. But now he's facing criticism from Republicans for his gaffe. We'll discuss the future of the GOP and an exclusive interview with Jason Chaffetz. Then, the crisis in Syria deepens as the Russians bomb Assad's enemies and tell the U.S. to get out of the way.
Into the wreckage of this administration's Middle East policy has now stepped Vladimir Putin.
What does Russia's move mean for the future of the region? We'll ask retired four-star General Jack Keane and Ryan Crocker, former U.S. ambassador to Iraq and Syria. Plus, another mass shooting as a gunman targets Christians at an Oregon community college.
Our thoughts and prayers are not enough. This is a political choice that we make to allow this to happen every few months in America.
Our panel weighs in on the president's comments and what can be done to prevent more massacres. And our power...
I'm not going to show you the panel weighing in on the gun massacres, but spoiler alert, there's really nothing we could do. According to most of the people on the panel, just like what you heard from those Republican candidates earlier. Also, you notice Fox News Sunday was the only one to focus on Christians being targeted, although in other reports I heard that anyone who had any religion, not just, he was targeting religion, not just Christianity, but of course Fox News would focus on the Christianity part. I'm not sure, still the story isn't all that clear, but like I said, this wasn't, the topic I'm covering now isn't the shooting, and though I did want to show how the Fox News introduced the whole thing, and they sort of cut down the clip of the big gaffe from Republican Kevin McCarthy, who's the leading candidate for Speaker of the House. I want to show what he actually said on the Hannity program, talking to Sean Hannity, where he was basically bragging about his accomplishments. And you'll see by the end, Sean Hannity isn't aghast that he talked about using the Benghazi Committee for political purposes. He actually gives him credit for it over in this clip.
Towards that.
Okay.
Now look, the question I think you really want to ask me is, how am I going to be different? What are you going to see differently?
I love that you asked my questions, but go ahead. That was one of my questions. Go right ahead.
Well, I knew you'd want to ask it. What you're going to see is a conservative speaker that takes a conservative Congress that puts a strategy to fight and win. And let me give you one example. Everybody thought Hillary Clinton was unbeatable, right? But we put together a Benghazi special committee, a select committee. What are her numbers today? Her numbers are dropping. Why? Because she's untrustable. But no one would have known any of that had happened had we not fought and made that happen.
That's something good. I give you credit for that. I give you credit for sequestration. I'll give you credit where credit is due. But
well, Sean Hannity may be giving him credit where credit is due, but most people find it wrong for a congressional committee to be used for partisan political purposes in the 2016 presidential campaign. And as you saw in the previous clip from the introduction on Fox News Sunday, Kevin McCarthy came on special report the next day and walked back the comments or clarified the comments. But basically, he was in trouble because he told the truth, what everyone knows about this select Benghazi committee, that it was put together to try to bring down Hillary Clinton's numbers, even though there were all these other Benghazi investigations. And what I heard someone say earlier this week that Benghazi, it's a tragedy in search of a scandal, and they never found the scandal. But anyway, before I leave the topic of the conflict in the Republican Party for Speaker of the House, I want to show the person on Fox News Sunday who said that he is going to be challenging Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker of the House. And it's this Representative Jason Chaffetz from Utah, who I've never really liked. I watched this last week. He chaired the committee hearing that spent 5 hours grilling the head of Planned Parenthood, Cecile Richards. I actually watched almost that whole thing, and I've seen Jason Chaffetz do other things in the past that have not endeared him to me, and his discussion of why he's running for Speaker of the House didn't endear him to me either, but you can tell me what you think after you watch that clip from Fox News Sunday this morning here.
Days ago, you said you supported Kevin McCarthy for Speaker, and it was widely assumed that as Majority Leader, the number 2 position in the GOP caucus, that he would move up when John Boehner moved out. Why are you even considering the idea of running against McCarthy?
Well, Kevin McCarthy is a good man. He's a big reason why we have such a solid majority. But things have changed, and there's really a math problem. You need 218 votes on the floor of the House. There are 246 Republicans that will vote, but there are nearly 50 people, and a growing number, that will not and cannot vote for Kevin McCarthy as the Speaker on the floor. He's going to fall short of the 218 votes on the floor of the House.
So, what are you going to do? Are you running for Speaker? Are you going to put your name forward when the House caucus votes on Thursday?
Today, here, I am announcing my intention to run for Speaker of the House of Representatives. We were entrusted by the American people with the largest majority the Republicans have ever had since Babe Ruth was swinging the baseball bat. But they didn't send us here to perpetuate the status quo. They want us to tackle the tough issues. They don't want us to fight. They want us to fight. They want us to take that fight to the Senate. They want us to take that fight to the President. And they want us to take that fight to the American people.
So I'm not going to show the entire interview where he talks about how, I think it's on Tuesday, there's going to be a caucus of just the Republicans, and Jason Chaffetz is going to lose that vote because a majority of Republicans support Kevin McCarthy. But his argument is, even if a majority of Republicans support him, he doesn't have 218 votes. There are about 50 Republicans, I think, out of the 240-something. I think it's 245, 248. I can't remember the exact number of Republicans in the House of Representatives. But you need 218 votes, and there are about 50 Republicans that aren't going to vote for Kevin McCarthy. And so when it comes to the full House of Representatives later, and he doesn't get the 218 votes, then Jason Chaffetz is going to resurrect his campaign, and there may be some kind of fight, and it's not certain who's going to be Speaker of the House. So I wanted to show you those 3 clips because that's going to be an ongoing story as to who's going to lead the Republicans in the House of Representatives. I only have 2 more clips I want to show you. Both come from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. The first one is a Neil deGrasse Tyson clip where they talk about this theory of panspermia that has gotten a little more credence when liquid water was found on Mars this last week. And that was a really big story. I watched that whole press conference too, and I was a little sad that it wasn't covered at all on the Sunday morning news programs, except for the State of the Cartoonion at the end of CNN State of the Union, which I'm not going to show. But here's Bill Maher and Neil deGrasse Tyson last Friday discussing liquid water on Mars and the theory of panspermia in this clip.
So one more thing about Mars, which I thought was very fascinating, that maybe life on Earth is because it was seeded from Mars.
Yeah.
Because like an asteroid or something?
Yeah, so all evidence tells us that Mars was sort of wet and fertile.
Wait.
I was going to say moist, but I said no, I just said wet.
Talk like that with that vest. You will charm the ladies tonight.
Mars was wet and fertile before Earth was. And computer simulations tell us that in the early solar system, there was heavy bombardment because the planets were still forming from all the debris that was left over from when the largest bodies had taken shape. And so if you have a large impactor on a surface, it can fling surrounding rocks into space. And if they have nooks and crannies on those rocks that contain microbes, then you have interplanetary microbes. Not all of them will survive. Most will die. But those that do survive will be the ones that have resistance to radiation, high temperature, low temperature. They can be freeze-dried.
The tardigrade.
Exactly.
Well, you know, I learned. Yeah. And by the way,
no, the tardigrade, the water bear.
Yeah, now I learned about it on Cosmos on your show.
Thank you,
yes.
thank you.
And do we have a picture of the tardigrade or a video? Oh,
there you go.
And
that
I know
the coolest, funkiest thing.
It is the ugliest thing. I mean, and this is not microscopic. You can actually. It's tiny.
To get the detail, you need the microscope.
Right, but it's not. It's tiny.
It's otherwise called a water bear, and it survives
everywhere.
Everywhere. You can't kill the thing with any normal way that you would kill every other life form. And so there is no.
Like what? Super cold, super hot, like no oxygen.
Here's the best one. You could dry it out. It would go into like a suspended animation. Add water later, and it'll come back to life. And so these are the kinds.
So roaches have nothing on this.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. So there's no known reason why any life form on Earth should have that kind of resistance.
Right.
Because there's no drivers of natural selection that would give you that. But we do know something that does, and that is an interplanetary stowaway trip of microbes from Mars to Earth. So it may be that all life on Earth was seeded by Martian life.
Unbelievable. Now
that's called.
So that was a really cool discussion, and I was kind of disappointed that the news of liquid water on Mars got almost zero coverage from the corporate media here in the United States, those Sunday morning news programs that I always cover. And so I wanted to at least show a clip, and there's a longer discussion. I think that may be one of the segments that's available on the YouTube channel. I'm not sure. But I also wanted to show a clip finally at the end. For the final clip, Richard Dawkins was on, and he also was on the overtime segment talking to Neil deGrasse Tyson. But this is an interview just with Bill Maher and Richard Dawkins, and they talked about several topics, and then they ended talking about liberals. And, you know, as LiberalViewer, I guess I have to show this clip and talk about it a little bit. First, about the intolerance of liberals on college campuses in terms of who they invite to come and speak, and invitations that have been rescinded. And then also Bill Maher talks about Muslims, the ongoing topic over and over again, and even claims that Islamophobia doesn't exist, as I'll discuss after you watch that final clip of the night over here.
The liberals. I fucking hate them too. I really do. Let's talk about that, because our friend Sam Harris coined an interesting word this week, a phrase, regressive leftists. You know, the people who don't quite get it about being liberals in the world. I know you were championing somebody named Maryam Namazi, and you and our great friend Salman Rushdie got her reinstated. She was going to speak, as so many people have at universities, and then they get disinvited because she's an ex-Muslim and was just speaking her mind, but apparently that's hate speech in this world. So what did you and Salman...
I am shocked about the way on university campuses, the principle of free speech, when I think that the old university I went to, University of California at Berkeley, the free speech movement in the 1960s, what a betrayal we're seeing now.
Right.
With campuses all over the Western world, all over America and Britain, are denying people the right to come and speak at campuses. If you can't speak your mind on a university campus, where can you? I mean, that's what universities are about. It's about free speech. It's about being brought... It's about being exposed to ideas that you haven't met before, perhaps you're hostile to. If you only ever get exposed to ideas that you agree with, what kind of a university would that be?
But also this notion that somehow Islam and Muslims are this protected species, that if we talk about them at all or criticize at all, it's somehow hurting or humiliating Muslims.
Yes.
And it's a ridiculous idea.
And it's confused with racism as well, because an incredible number of people think Islam is a race.
Yes. Oh, I've heard that, yeah. Right.
And so they think that if you criticize Islam, you're being racist.
Right,
and you're absolutely right that the regressive Muslims give a free pass to Islam, whereas they kind of write about everything else. I mean, they write about misogyny and all the other bad things in that case.
You're talking about repressive leftists,
yes,
liberals, yeah.
Yes. But in the case of Islam, it just gets a free pass.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of the terror of being thought racist.
Right. Or at worst, an Islamophobe.
Islamophobia.
Yes,
yeah.
a silly word that means nothing.
Yes.
I mean, it's so dumb because, you know, all the people who are accused of being Islamophobes, like you and me and Sam and Ian, we're liberals. We're liberals about everything. I mean, from the time I was a child in my home, I was 7 years old when my parents told me, we're for Kennedy and him trying to let black people go to college in the South. I didn't even know who black people were. There weren't any in my town. I knew we were on their side, and then we were on the side of Cesar Chavez and the lettuce pickers, and then we were on the side... Then we were on the side of the women's movement and poor and the minorities, whatever it was, gay people, the disabled, the abused, the molested, whatever Caitlin is up to. We were for it. And they applaud that, and if you say something about a woman who's forced to wear a beekeeper suit in the hot sun all day...
Oh, that's their culture, you have to respect it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's what they say. It's just insane.
Yes, it's just the one exception, liberal about everything else, but then this one exception, it's their culture. Well, to hell with their culture.
There you go, Dr. Richard Dawkins.
So, if you've been watching my critique of Bill Maher and Sam Harris, that's gone back many, many months, I've never said it's their culture, so you can't criticize what happens in certain Muslim countries. I've actually said the opposite, that you shouldn't blame Islam and the Muslim religion. You should blame the culture more, that people bring these prejudices and, you know, like female genital mutilation isn't in Islam, and it comes from a lot of cultures in that area that have kind of melded on to Islam. And also what Bill Maher said about Islamophobia, how it, you know, doesn't even really exist. I keep getting that comment, like a made-up word. I've gotten that comment every time I talk about Islamophobia. I mean, if you look up Islamophobia in the dictionary, it is a word, it exists. I didn't make it up. It's a word that people use to discuss prejudice or hatred against Muslims or Islam. It's, you know, it may etymologically not make a lot of sense, just like homophobia or anti-Semitism, for example. If an Arab hates Jews, he's anti-Semitic, even though both Arabs and Jews generally ethnically come from a Semitic background. And then that whole thing about, you know, calling people who are Islamophobic racist, and Islam's not a race. Well, race is actually a social construct, and sometimes Muslims and or Jews and, you know, anti-Semitism that have been termed a race because, you know, especially they should read this book over here by Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me, where he talks a lot about how race is a construct to talk about who the other people are. I mean, I personally never say that it's racist. I usually say prejudiced, bigoted, or Islamophobic, just to stop that stupid counter argument about you can't be racist because Islam's not a race. But racism can also be used as a more generic term. And then going all the way back to the beginning of that clip about college campuses, I mean, I think that people who claim to be liberal should be tolerant and open to a lot of diverse kind of ideas. The one little quibble I have with the argument is, and when you disinvite people who have already been invited, that is a kind of censorship. But I don't think that the one quibble I wanted to make is that being invited to speak at a college campus isn't really a free speech right. That's now being invited and then getting disinvited, like I said, that does kind of have some free speech implications. But, you know, Bill Maher's not inviting me on his show to talk. Does that mean that he's violating my free speech rights? No, I mean, it's good to have a diverse source of opinions, and there are other problems on college campuses that I think where, you know, hate speech codes and criticizing religion as a reason not to let people come and speak, or criticizing Islam even, or precepts of Islam. I've tried to point out my differences with Bill Maher and Sam Harris and the other, and some of the things Richard Dawkins said about Ahmed Muhammad, the 14-year-old clock kid, showed a little twinge of Islamophobia at least. And the problem is that they start with an assumption that people who believe in these Muslim texts somehow come out worse than any of the other Abrahamic religions like Judaism or Christianity. And there's like not a lot of negative things and positive things in all those texts. In fact, they share several texts. And so to say that Islam is the motherlode of bad ideas, that's just not accurate, and it's not fair to the many people who are moderate and liberal and who call themselves Muslims. And I had some people in the comment section say that I was saying that Bill Maher was saying that all Muslims are bad, when that's not what he's saying. But he is saying that that the religion of Islam is worse than any of the other religions, and you know that's what got him into trouble when Sam Harris was on with the whole motherlode of bad ideas concept, that Islam was somehow worse than the others. And that's where I really I don't have problems with people who criticize religion as being irrational, based, because that's what, you know, a faith-based outlook on the world is. It's irrational. It's not based on evidence. It's based on some irrational belief, and I disagree with that all across the board for all religions. That's why I'm an agnostic. I am skeptical, and I don't believe in things based on no evidence, and I don't have any problem with critiquing anyone who believes in things based on no evidence. But those people who focus on Islam as somehow worse, and the Quran is somehow worse than the Christian Bible or the Jewish Bible, that's where I think they go off the rails, and that when they single out Muslims for needing to, you know, that most terrorism comes from Muslims, which isn't true. And anyway, I think I've responded to that clip as much as I want to, and I'm going to have a little bit of a shorter show this week, a little under 90 minutes, which I guess is nice. I only had 25 clips, and I hope to make another edited, produced video, or at least put something up between next Sunday's show and tonight. Next Sunday's show will hopefully start closer to on time. I'm trying to do it at 6 p.m. Pacific, which is Greenwich Mean Time minus 7 hours. I didn't start till about 6:35 p.m. tonight, but I appreciate all of you who showed up to watch a live show. I've been reading your comments. It was almost 200 people at the peak, and still over 180 watching now, so thanks to all of you. If you want to help support the show, especially, I may not make any money on the show. You'll have to, if you see no ads as a recorded show, it's because one of my HBO clips wasn't shrunk down and I got a copyright claim. If you want to give me a little bit of help for direct fan subscriber, there's a Patreon page. There's a little eye if you hover your mouse right here in this corner. You can either give me a direct donation or become one of my patrons. My patrons were just charged for the last month, and I have over 50 patrons who are pledging $300 a month. As I've said before, I'm hoping to get that up to about $400, which would be $100 per week for each of these shows. Then I don't have to depend on the ad revenue to come close to making minimum wage for the... Takes about 8 or 9 hours to prepare, and then of course an hour or two to broadcast, and then there's some after maintenance I have to do at the end to get it all ready. But anyway, for the recorded show. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the 25 clips I picked out for you this week, and I hope it left you a little bit more informed on what it is the corporate media here in the United States thinks is important, and a couple other clips I added in. Mars, for example. I guess HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher does count as corporate media because it is owned by a big corporation, but it is a little bit more skewed than the rest of the clips, even more skewed than Saturday Night Live, which seemed pretty pro-Hillary and pro-establishment this week. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section, and until next week, I guess I'll be seeing you all around the internet.